The asphalt shimmered under the dying amber light as Marcus eased his wheelchair along the lonely stretch of highway. His puppy, white fur darkened with dust, nestled against his lap in a tattered blanket. Each revolution of the wheels a quiet act of defiance against muscles that fought him at every turn. He felt the breeze in his face and heard the distant hum of engines like a promise of freedom, until the roar grew into a pack of thunderous motorcycles, leather-clad silhouettes cutting through. The dusk, their snarling exhausts echoing like battle drums, and in an instant the world shifted from tranquil to terror as a burly biker leader kicked out snarling, his boot catching the puppy's blanket with a sickening crunch of fabric and small bones while his gang howled with delight and spat venomous taunts. "Keep on rolling, cripple boy," their words stabbing at Marcus's chest like twisted barbs, and as the puppy trembled beneath their boots, a storm of rage and helplessness rose in Marcus's veins, the helplessness of a boy who knew every injustice cut deeper because the only ally he had was as vulnerable as his own beating heart. Marcus pressed forward, every push of his hands a battle against the screaming ache in his arms and the rough asphalt that tried to swallow his wheels as biker exhaust smoke curled around him like a noose. The puppy huddled against his legs, whimpering from the jolt of that first stomp. Behind him, the gang roared approval, voices hoarse with hatred. "That nigger can't even roll straight," and the leader revved his engine close enough that the heat singed Marcus's face, mocking his trembling skin. The puppy's blanket, ripped and stained, lay half under Marcus's chair and half dragged on the ground as the wind carried the smell of gasoline and bile. And when Marcus tried to lift the blanket, one biker leaned down, sneering. "What's the matter? Cripple! Your dog too dirty to walk on blacktop." His laughter spread like wildfire through the group, fanning Marcus's shame into a blaze. He blinked back tears, heart hammering, as the puppy nosed his knee, eyes glassy with fear and loyalty, a reminder that he couldn't give up. Yet each rotation of the wheel was agony, muscles burning like fire, while the bikers circled, boots scraping the pavement, tokens of their contempt. "You think you're special with that mutt? Go back under your rock, boy." One of them spat again, the warm spray landing on Marcus's cheek, tasting of nicotine and disgust. He fought the urge to recoil and found himself gripping the arms of his chair so tight his knuckles turned white. The leader kicked a wheel, nearly sending Marcus careening into the ditch, and the puppy yelped, scrambling under the chair. Pain shot through Marcus's side as he lunged to protect it, but the biker's boot drove down on the blanket's edge, crushing it again as others jeered. "That dog'll never save you." Desperation clawed at Marcus's throat. No sirens, no passers-by, only the mocking grumble of engines and the rattling of his own breath. He closed his eyes for a heartbeat and saw his father's stern silhouette in a courtroom, gavels echoing, laws bending toward justice, and it steeled him. With a final heaving effort, he twisted his wheels toward the roadside embankment, dragging the puppy's tangled blanket free, and shouted, voice cracking but resolute, "Leave us alone!" The command, small as it was, sliced through the haze of cruelty, and for the first time, the bikers hesitated, uncertain, exposed to a dignity they could not crush. The leader's sneer faltered, and the gang's roar died to a rumble as Marcus lifted the trembling puppy into his arms. Blanket patched, but held together by love. Smoke and sweat mingled in the air as the bikers exchanged glances, their swagger faltering in the face of his defiance. And in that heartbeat of stunned silence, Marcus realized that the wheels beneath him might slow, might stumble, but he would never stop moving forward, no matter how loud their hatred, no matter how deep their scars, because some bonds, like the one between boy and dog, are stronger than the darkest hate. The cruelty. Behind the V-twin roar. The biker gang's engines faded into an ominous drone as Marcus veered his wheelchair down a narrow side road. The puppy snug in his arms, but trembling like a fallen soldier, and each turn of the wheels felt like dragging his own weight through quicksand. Yet he refused to stop because he knew the moment he paused, the bikers would circle back to finish their taunting ritual. Behind him, a single headlight pierced the dusk, then another, until the pack re-emerged as spectral silhouettes against the dimming sky, their leather jackets smelling of oil and arrogance, and the leader cut his engine within arm's reach. revving it once more, as if daring Marcus to flinch. "Thought you'd run off, huh?" the leader drawled, voice thick with contempt, and he spat again, the warm droplet landing on the puppy's soft fur. A cruel joke passed through the riders. Someone snapped a photo. Another man mimicked a seizure, their laughter ricocheting off the cold steel of bike frames, while Marcus's knuckles whitened as he gripped the puppy's harness, determined to protect the fragile life in his arms. One biker flicked a cigarette butt onto the ground, letting it roll to Marcus's wheels, and sneered, "Is your mutt gonna save you now, cripple?" The word cripple cut deeper than any physical blow, its echo 1,000 whispers of helplessness that threatened to drown him. But Marcus lifted his chin and guided his wheels faster, each push carrying a spark of defiance in the face of their hate. The puppy whimpered, pressing its head into his chest, and he whispered soothing words that tasted like tears on his tongue. The bikers closed in, forming a throat of steel around him, boots stomping the pavement like gavel strikes, demanding surrender. A harsh wind kicked up dust in their faces, and the leader barked, "Show us your daddy now! Does he rule the road?" At that moment, headlights blazed around the bend, blue and red sirens slicing through the twilight, and the bikers' arrogant grins faltered. Marcus heard the hiss of a police cruiser's brakes, and in the shifting light he saw uniforms stepping out with startled urgency. The leader's jaw clenched as he muttered curses under his breath. The puppy's tail wagged in confused relief. Marcus slowed, tears stinging his eyes, but a fierce pride warming his chest, as the officers formed a line between him and the bikers. The leader backed away, revving his engine in a final act of defiance before pulling a face of pure rage, then turned his bike and roared off down the highway, the rest of his gang sputtering behind him. The night air rang with the echo of engines and the thin hum of police radios. Marcus sank back in his chair as an officer knelt beside him, checking the puppy's limp leg and asking if he was okay. Marcus brushed a hand over the puppy's fur and nodded, voice breaking with relief. "Thank you." The officer offered a comforting smile and called for a patrol to secure the scene, while another radioed for a K9 unit to check the bikers for weapons. As police lights danced off the chrome of the abandoned motorcycles, Marcus remained on that side road, dog cradled close, the storm of hatred receding into memory, and in the space left behind, he heard the steady rumble of justice arriving. And in its rumble he felt a new strength stirring, a promise that no act of cruelty, no spit of prejudice, could ever stop him from rolling forward. Let's pause for a moment. Tell us in the comments where you're listening from, and if you've ever faced something like this in your own life. Remember to subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. We continue now. Marcus's heartbeat thundered in his ears as the police sirens faded, leaving only the quivering echo of engines dying on the highway. He pressed forward, every motion a fight against exhaustion. The puppy's fractured leg cradled in his arms, its soft whimpers a mournful hymn to their ordeal, when a sleek black SUV slid to a stop alongside them, the engine's purr swallowing the last gust of biker smoke, and the door swung open to reveal a broad-shouldered man in a long black robe, his gavel case dangling from his wrist like a silent promise of justice. His father, Judge Alexander Hayes, whose stern gaze had presided over Millstone trials, but had never shown such molten anger as it did now, when he saw his son and the trembling creature clutched against him. Without a word he knelt, smoothing Marcus's hair back from his forehead with trembling fingers, and his voice, low and raw, broke the hollow hush of road and sky. "Are you hurt? Is he all right?" The puppy's tail thumped weakly against Marcus's leg as the judge gently lifted it from his arms, examining the muddy coat, the bruised paw, the quiver of small bones pressed against soft flesh, and every tremor in that fragile body. Flared a blaze of fury in the judge's chest, fury that erupted as he rose and spun to the empty roadside, fists clenched, voice crackling like lightning in a roar that dwarfed any motorcycle's thunder. "Police! Arrest them for assault on a minor! Arrest them for animal cruelty!" Overhead, helicopters answered. Blue lights blinked to life again, and the distant roar of reinforcements rippled along the asphalt. Meanwhile, the bikers, once so certain of their power, stumbled as if struck by a gale, their leathers catching in the wind of their own retreat, faces paling as they realized they had spat on the judge's son and stomped his puppy into submission. The leader's swagger faltered into a hollow shuffle, his eyes flicking to the judge's robes like a moth flirting with flame. And his cronies shuffled at his side, adrenaline bleeding into dread as the weight of their cowardice settled on their shoulders. Marcus watched as the officers cuffed them one by one, reading each suspect their rights with a crisp clarity that foretold every charge they would face: hate crime, assault, cruelty to an animal, child endangerment, and the humiliating flash of cameras from every angle turned the bikers into backlit silhouettes of shame. As his father scooped him up into a bear-like embrace, Marcus felt tears flow for the first time since the first kick, the tears of relief and sorrow mingling on his cheeks, while the puppy nestled under the judge's arm, its small body already calming at the sound of a parent's voice. The judge's voice cracked as he whispered into his son's hair, "No one will touch you again. No one will harm him again." And in that vow echoed the fierce promise of law unleashed, of prejudice undone, of love reclaiming ground stolen by hate. As reinforcements cleared the scene and the SUV's doors opened to carry them home, Marcus looked back once at the motorcycles lined like defeated spectres under the floodlights, their riders now shrinking into themselves, burdened by the full weight of their crimes. He realized then that courage does not always roar. It sometimes whispers in the turning of wheels, the beating of a small dog's heart, the silent strength of a judge who kneels to cradle his child. And as the headlights carried them onto the ribbons of highway towards sanctuary, the night air shimmered not with fear, but with the dawn of a reckoning that would blaze longer and brighter than any highway's edge. The trial by fire and the echo of prejudice. The morning courtroom was already a crucible of tension when Marcus, his face pale from fatigue and sleeplessness, arrived flanked by his father in judge's robes and a line of officers bearing custody, papers for the bikers. The gallery overflowed with journalists wielding microphones like torches, their lenses trained on the trembling puppy perched at Marcus's feet. And as the bailiff banged his gavel to call the room to order, a murmur rippled through the crowd, some voices whispering sympathy, others spewing veiled contempt. "He merely got in their way," one man hissed, arms folded. "Is this just a judge's son playing victim?" Another challenged, and the words settled around Marcus like acid. The prosecutor rose, voice steady, but edged with righteous indignation, and recounted the horrific sequence. How a circle of leather-clad men had encircled a disabled boy, spat on him with racist venom, stomped his puppy into the dust, unaware that the boy's father carried the highest authority in that county. Each word painted a portrait of cruelty so raw it made shoulders stiffen and lips tighten in shame. Yet even as evidence photos flicked across the projection screen, the torn blanket, the reddened paw, the grill of boots on soft fur, some jurors' eyes drifted away, discomfort mingling with that old, bitter reluctance to believe that such hatred still thrived. The defense attorney, a smug figure in a tailored suit, rose next, pivoting the narrative to youthful bravado, misplaced bravado, and no clear intent to harm, minimizing kicks into foot shoves and racist slurs into heated words in a tense moment. His tone was polished, his arguments surgical. Yet every slide of the puppy's trembling body and Marcus's silent tears under the witness stand spoke louder than legalese. As the defense called its first witness, a grizzled biker who denied stomping the dog, insisting they only meant to scare him off the road, gasps filled the room when the witness casually dubbed Marcus, that cripple boy, in open court. A slur, shocking in its brazenness, and the puppy let out a plaintive whine that silenced even the judge. Marcus's father pounded the bench with his gavel, calling for order, but the damage was done. The courtroom's veneer of civility shattered, revealing a festering bed of prejudice. Marcus, arms trembling around his puppy's dirty blanket, clamped his jaw to keep from shouting the truth, that a judge's robe did not shield him from hate, that his disability and skin made him a target, that justice felt as elusive as the wind. When he finally rose to speak, voice cracking with pain and defiance, he described the blur of boots, the hiss of slurs, the horrified whimper of the puppy's broken trust. He spoke not as a victim seeking pity, but as a witness demanding recognition, that cruelty does not observe authority, that evil can strike even where society thinks itself safe. The judge's gavel echoed like a heartbeat as he called for a recess, and in the hush that followed, reporters jostled for a word with Marcus's father, some lauding his swift intervention, others questioning whether power had bought justice. In the hall outside, protesters had gathered, one side holding signs, "Justice for Marcus," another brandishing, "Privilege protects its own." A man jeered through a megaphone, "Your son played the race card," while a mother wept holding her toddler, close whispering, "No child deserves this." Marcus, his puppy now wrapped in a fresh blanket, felt his heart swing between despair and resolve. He knew the coming days would be a gauntlet of testimony and cross-examination, that every racist laugh and cold stare would follow him into the jury room. But in that moment, he understood that speaking his truth, laying bare the shame of those riders, was his only path to healing. As court resumed, cameras tilted upward to catch each verdict-determining glance, each bead of sweat on the biker's brows, and with every charged utterance, every reluctant confession from reluctant witnesses, Marcus felt the tide shift. Slowly, painfully but unmistakably, toward accountability. The puppy's soft whimper in his lap was a reminder that innocence could survive brutality, and that justice, though imperfect and delayed, could still be seized by those brave enough to demand it. And as the judge called the final recess before closing statements, Marcus leaned forward, eyes bright with tears and determination, ready to face the last crucible of prejudice, and emerge not just as a boy who once suffered hate, but as a symbol that no act of cruelty, no shout of racism could extinguish the light of his courage. The echoes of hatred on the courtroom floor. As dawn broke on the courthouse plaza, Marcus felt his pulse like a drumbeat of dread and defiance, each breath a battle cry against the nightmare of yesterday's attack. And when he wheeled through those towering columns flanked by reporters and curious onlookers, he sensed every whisper crash against him like waves of indignation. Some voices muttered, "What a shame, judge's boy playing victim." Others cheered, "Justice at last." But all of it boiled down to one truth. They still saw him first as that cripple and that nigger kid, rather than a child who had survived hate itself. Inside the oak doors, the air was stale with anticipation as the jury filed in, their eyes flicking from Marcus's trembling puppy, cradled in his lap, to the bikers shackled at the defendant's table, their faces pale as they realized the stakes, not only their freedom, but the reckoning of every slur they had spat, every boot they had driven into soft fur, every taunt that had branded Marcus like a scar. The judge's gavel sounded, and the prosecutor returned to deliver closing arguments, her voice steady, unwavering as she recounted the bikers' brutal circle of hate, how they had spat with words sharp as razors and stomped with boots heavy with contempt, how the puppy's whimpers had echoed Marcus's own suffocating shame as he tried to shield his friend from cowardly cruelty. She reminded the jury that this was not mere youthful bravado, but a calculated act of violence sparked by race and disability, a hate crime that demanded accountability equal to its cruelty. When she spoke of the word nigger hurled at Marcus, of how it cut deeper than any boot, the room grew still, as if the heat of her words had burned through every layer of denial. Then the defense rose, attempting to recast slurs as heated language and kicks as misplaced foot shoves. But each word rang hollow next to the puppy's trembling form and the testimony of witnesses who had witnessed the barbarism in real time. One witness, a truck driver passing by, described how he had seen the leader press his boot onto the puppy's flank and heard him sneer, "You don't belong on this road, freak," before Marcus's desperate cry had shattered the night. Another, the waitress from the roadside diner, spoke of how she had heard the gang's chants of nigger scum and cripple trash, and how her own shame had silenced her until now. As the defense lawyer sputtered, searching for sympathy, Marcus felt every drop of patience drain from the courtroom's walls. His chest tightened as if the air itself had turned against him. But then he caught his father's gaze, steadfast, unbroken, and something inside him ignited. When the judge called for Marcus's testimony, his voice caught like a wounded bird's, but he spoke of every detail. The roar of the engines, the sickening crackle of boots, the red stain of saliva on his sleeve, the way the puppy had trembled as if its heart would shatter. He spoke not as a victim pleading for pity, but as a witness demanding recognition that hate had violated not just their bodies, but their very dignity. His words, carried on the tremor of tears unshed, filled the room with the weight of lived terror. And in that thunderous silence that followed, even the jurors shifted, no longer detached, but people touched by the raw ache of innocence betrayed. After hours of legal wrangling, the judge sent the jury to deliberate, and Marcus wheeled to the hallway where a flood of support met him. Classmates who had once laughed now offered whispered apologies. Neighbors held his hand, eyes wet with shared grief. Even the clinic's former staff, now united against cruelty, quietly thanked him for giving them courage to speak truth. In that corridor of echoes, Marcus realized that while cruelty had once seemed unstoppable, like a pack of roaring engines, it could be answered with the stillness of truth and the roar of justice combined. Hours later, the jury returned with a verdict of guilty on all counts: hate crime, assault, animal cruelty, child endangerment. The bikers' shackles clinked as they were led away, their faces etched with disgrace and the sudden reckoning that their cruelty would not vanish behind leather and steel. The judge's gavel fell, not as a sound of finality, but as the first note of a new chorus, one in which Marcus's life would no longer be defined by the boots that had stomped him down, but by the courtroom that had lifted him up. As he wheeled from the bench, Puppy snuggled safe in his lap. Sunlight caught his tears and turned them into diamonds of hope, and he understood that while the echoes of hatred might linger on every highway, the echo of justice would ring louder, guiding him forward on wheels that would never again yield to fear. The sentence that shook steel and shamed souls. Marcus sat rigid in his wheelchair as the courtroom doors swung open to admit the bikers shackled and flanked by bailiffs, their leather jackets trading places for orange jumpsuits that mocked their former swagger. And as they stumbled to their seats at the defendant's table, every eye in the room, reporters, jurors, onlookers, followed them with the weight of history hanging in the air. The judge's bench gleamed like a sunlit altar, and behind the gavel stood Judge Alexander Hayes, his robe folded precisely around his shoulders, face carved from marble and grief, as he prepared to pronounce a sentence that would echo far beyond the courthouse steps. Marcus's puppy, now bandaged and nestled in its custom carrier, perched quietly at his feet, its dark eyes reflecting the courtroom lights and the flicker of hope in a boy who had once thought justice a distant rumor. The prosecutor rose, voice low yet resounding, to deliver the sentencing recommendation. 20 years combined for hate crime and aggravated assault, 15 for animal cruelty, and mandatory counseling for each defendant. Her words sliced through the hush, enumerating each kick, each spit, each racial epithet spat at a vulnerable child. Acts committed under the cloak of night that now bore the full daylight of accountability. The defense attorney, sagging as though the courtroom's gravity sucked the fight from his limbs, attempted one last plea for mercy. These were youthful transgressions. No one truly meant lasting harm. They were led astray by bravado, but his entreaties fell like soggy leaves before the furnace of condemnation ignited by the judge's steely gaze. When Judge Hayes stood to speak, the world stopped. His voice, rich with sorrow and unwavering resolve, carried the weight of every parent whose child had ever been denied dignity, every citizen whose skin had ever made them a target, every animal whose loyalty had been repaid with cruelty. "You crossed a line drawn by law and decency," he said, each phrase punctuated by the sharp rap of his gavel on the sound block. "You sought to destroy the spirit of a child because of the color of his skin and his need for a service animal. You assaulted innocence itself. Today, this court will ensure that your actions carry consequences reflective of their severity and their stain on our community." The defendant's shoulders slumped as the sentence rang out, their boots tapping a shameful rhythm against the floor. Marcus could feel the tension release like steam from a kettle, every syllable of justice landing heavier than any boot heel he had known. Yet even in this moment of triumph, his heart beat with sorrow for what had been lost, the puppy's fractured trust, the boy's shattered faith in the kindness of strangers, and as his father pronounced the sentences, delivering each term with unwavering clarity, Marcus squeezed the puppy's carrier, whispering a vow that he would protect this small life from ever knowing fear again. Outside the gallery, cameras flashed with furious intensity, capturing every grimace on the bikers' faces, every dampened tear on Marcus's cheek, every flicker of pride that lit his father's stern features. Reporters clamored for statements. How does it feel, young man, to see them sentenced? What will you say to other children who face similar hate? Do you believe this will change anything? Marcus swallowed the echo of his own courage and answered in a voice that trembled with raw emotion. I hope it teaches them that cruelty carries a price, that no one is above justice, and that love and duty will always be stronger than hate. The puppy let out a soft whimper, as if in agreement, and Judge Hayes called for order to guide the family from the bench. As they exited into the late afternoon sun, the courthouse steps were no longer a stage for hatred, but a platform for healing. Protesters hoisted banners of solidarity, neighbors offered quiet embraces, and even some bikers' families gathered at a respectful distance to witness the cost of prejudice. Marcus felt the heat of cheers mingled with the sting of memories. But in the embrace of his father and the gentle nuzzle of his puppy's snout against his hand, he found the truth. Justice delivered with unwavering purpose could mend the deepest scars and kindle a light that no darkness could extinguish. And as the heavy iron doors closed behind them, sealing the verdict in the annals of law, Marcus realized that the wheels beneath him would carry not just his body, but his story of triumph over terror, a story that would roll forward into every corner, of a world still learning that hatred might roar like thunder, but justice, once unleashed, would ring louder and endure longer than any storm. The whispered threats beneath the house. Lights. The air inside the judge's mansion was thick with aftershocks of victory, the ornate chandelier's crystal prisms scattering anxious shadows across the marble floors as Marcus and his father rode the slow lift of triumph from the courthouse steps to the quiet grandeur of home. But the echo of the crowd's cheers had barely faded when a sharp knock rang at the front door, jolting them from their fragile peace into a fresh tremor of dread. The judge's wife answered to find a lone envelope propped against the polished threshold, its edges stained with a smear of black grease. And inside lay a crude photograph of Marcus in his wheelchair, puppy in arms, beneath a scrawled warning. Dogs belong on leashes and niggers belong in ditches, signed with the biker gang's mark, a skull and crossed pistons, and with it a greasy fingerprint smudged like a curse. The mother's gasp shattered the hush, and the judge's stern facade cracked as he, palm-pressing the photograph to his chest, felt each drop of hate sink deeper than any boot ever could. Marcus's hands shook as he recognized the darkness reaching into their sanctuary, and in that moment they understood that sentencing the bikers had not broken the chain of cruelty. It had only driven its links deeper underground, where whispered threats festered and multiplied. That night, the windows shivered with each passing car's headlights, and every creak in the hall sounded like a phantom knock. The puppy whimpered under Marcus's bed as he held it close, his father pacing behind, robe sleeves swishing like ominous currents. By morning, the envelope had multiplied into 7 more, pinned to the judge's robe, the nursery door, and even the puppy's carrier, each bearing a different atrocity. A cigarette burned into the judge's desk documents. Black paint daubed across the parking spot reserved for Marcus's van. A note slipped under the puppy's food bowl that read, "Next time we won't miss his bones." The racist bile seeping through the ink was more corrosive than any acid, and it cut the judge deeper than any legal loss or public humiliation. As the threats escalated, the judge convened a private council. The county sheriff's office, the state attorney, and the local black clergy gathered in his study, the weight of law and faith poised to defend a family that had come to represent justice itself. Marcus sat on the leather chaise, puppy nestled in his arms, listening to the sheriff outline plans for round-the-clock patrols, escorts to school, and panic buttons tied to every phone. Yet even as protection wrapped around them like armor, Marcus felt the isolation hunger at his heart. At school, whispers followed him like vultures. He's the judge's son. They got what they deserved at court. They own the law, but we own the night. Teachers flinched when he passed, and classmates who once cheered his courage now crossed the hall away from his shadow, afraid that association might summon danger. Marcus's sense of triumph crumbled beneath the weight of suspicion and fear. Justice had come, but it had redecorated his world in shades of paranoia, and he wondered whether law could ever root out a hatred that thrived in the dark. One evening, as his father prepared to leave for a late-night briefing at the sheriff's precinct, Marcus ventured into the front hall and saw muddy footprints trailing down the carpet, boot treads dotted with a clotted red that glistened like blood. Beneath the foyer lights, his breath caught as he followed the stain to the puppy's kennel, where the soft fur was peppered with flecks of copper, the dog trembling not with fear, but shock. The judge dropped his briefcase in a single motion and knelt, scooping the puppy into his arms, calling its name like a prayer. And Marcus dropped to his knees as well, fingertips grazing the floor, tracing each footprint as though mapping the path of hatred straight into their home. The judge's voice cracked as he whispered, "They've crossed a line no sentence can mend." And Marcus bowed his head, tears spilling free as he realized that their battle had shifted from courtroom to living room, from public spectacle to the private. Horror that comes when hate invades the sanctuaries we call home. That night, they stayed together in the study, windows shuttered, lights dimmed, the puppy nestled between them. And outside the house, lights danced with the distant glow of patrol cars circling their block like sentries warding off an unseen siege. In that fragile cocoon of law and love, father and son steeled themselves for the next chapter, for they knew that words on paper might weigh heavy in court. But it was the whispered threats in the dark that demanded a fiercer courage, one born not of robes or verdicts, but of unbroken loyalty and the resolve to face hatred in its most insidious form, determined that no shadow, no midnight terror, could ever eclipse the light that burned within their family's unity. The storm was far from over, and as the mansion's clock chimed midnight, its resonant toll marked not an end, but the beginning of a new front in their war against the darkness. The gathering storm. Across every corner of his world, Marcus awoke to a phone buzzing with warnings, text messages from classmates, teachers, neighbors, cryptic threats promising tonight we finish what we started. No judge can protect you after dark. Hope you like pain. And as he rolled into the school parking lot, the asphalt was splattered with obscene graffiti scrawled overnight. Hayes's boy gets what's owed. Justice is a blade, and worst of all, a crude caricature of him in his wheelchair with the puppy beneath a boot, its tiny limbs twisted like broken promises. The flagpole stood at half-mast, in silent witness to his storm of humiliation, and every step of his chair echoed like a drumbeat of dread through the empty halls, where lockers bore fresh slashes and mocking notes. Bring your mutt to class if you dare. Nobody cares about your daddy's robes. Teachers whose eyes had brightened at his courtroom triumph now averted their gaze, as if proximity to the judge's son might summon the same violent shadow creeping through their classrooms. In the cafeteria, trays clattered as Marcus wheeled toward an empty table, the puppy resting in his lap under the table's grey metal edge. Whispers followed him like vultures circling carrion. Look at him clutching that mutt for pity. Bet he'll call the judge if you even sneeze. This is what privilege looks like. His cheeks burned with shame, each insult a hot coal pressed against his ribs. At gym class, he arrived to find the equipment rearranged into a gauntlet, basketballs dumped across the court, obstacles meant to trip his wheels, and when he wheeled through, a circle of jocks jeered. They pointed and mimed seizures, chanting fake, 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 until a single basketball smacked into his knee plate, the sting more than physical, and the coach looked away, whistle silent in his hand. Outside, on the soccer field, someone had posted a ransom note pinned to the goalpost. Return the judge's hammer, or lose what's left. Even the principal's office offered no refuge. The door was plastered with pages from tabloid headlines accusing his family of corruption, alleging that the judge had abused his power to stage a legal revenge, and beneath those pages, a smear of red paint dripped like blood across Marcus's name on the attendance roster. His spirit wavered with every new affront, until at the end of the day he felt hollow. A boy whose innocence had been hammered into shards by racism and the unapologetic brutality of others. He wheeled home beneath a sky bruised by dusk, each turn a silent plea for sanctuary. But the neighborhood was no refuge. Police cars lined the curb, their lights pulsing through living room curtains, while at the front door stood his mother, face pale beneath floodlights, and his father, sweatshirt pulled over his robes, fists clenched so tight the knuckles whitened. "They've upped the threats," his mother said, voice trembling as she closed the door behind him. "They broke your window, and they left turpentine-soaked rags on the floor." The smell of acrid smoke stung his nostrils, and fragments of broken glass glinted like tears on the hearth. The puppy whimpered as Marcus knelt to scoop him from his lap, clinging to his blanket as though it were the last anchor to a sinking ship. That night, the judge convened an emergency security detail. Off-duty officers, private guards, surveillance cameras aimed at every corner. But even iron and oath felt insufficient against hatred that thrived in the spaces between lights. As midnight approached, another knock rattled the door. When Marcus's father opened it, he found a single skull cap, stained with mud, and a sticky note. "See you at the crossroads." The crossroads, where Marcus had first been attacked, loomed beyond the hedge, an invitation to terror under the gunmetal sky. The judge returned inside, voice low as thunder. "We cannot run forever. You must face them." Marcus looked up, heart pounding with the raw ache of fear and defiance. "I'm tired of hiding," he whispered. "Let them show themselves." Before dawn, he wheeled outside, puppy strapped at his side, toward the crossroads where engines had once roared hate. He carried only his phone and the blanket patched with love, his father's gavel case slung across the back of the wheelchair like a banner. As the first rumble of motorcycles rose on the horizon, he felt every scar of the past week burn fresh, yet behind the fear glimmered a fierce light, a promise that he would not yield his dignity to shadow. When the bikers reappeared, leather jackets black as night, their boots hammering the road, they expected his silence and terror. Instead, they found a boy who wheeled forward with jaws clenched, eyes blazing, puppy tucked against his chest like a talisman of defiance. The engines died in the sudden hush as onlookers peered from behind hedges and windows, the world holding its breath at the standoff. A leader spat once more, but this time his spit curled to the pavement, not Marcus's sleeve. Marcus raised his voice above the gathering tension. "You can hate me all you like, but you will not break me. I am my own judge now." The words cut the dusk like a blade, slicing through the last threads of their contempt. The bikers recoiled, confusion warring with lingering rage, and behind them, the distant wail of sirens rose like a promise. In that charged moment at the crossroads, Marcus realized that the storm of hate had brought him here to face its full fury, but he would emerge unbowed, wheels still turning, heart still blazing, ready to forge a dawn beyond their darkest night. Marcus felt the rumble of his own heartbeat as the sea of motorcycles closed in, their engines purring like a pack of beasts circling prey. But this time he did not tremble. He sat tall in his wheelchair, the autumn wind tugging at his hair, his puppy wrapped in a fresh blanket against his chest, its eyes reflecting both fear and unbroken loyalty. Around him, the bikers formed an iron ring of leather and steel, their faces twisted with outrage that their whispered threats at dusk had failed to drive him into hiding. The leader, a scar-faced man whose tattoos spelled "No Mercy," revved his engine in a challenge that echoed across the empty crossroads. "You think you're brave, judge's boy," he sneered, voice raw with malice. "Think you can call the law on us and get away with it?" He spat at Marcus's wheels, the droplet landing like a curse on polished metal. The gang jeered, some mimicking the puppy's whimper, others hissing slurs so low Marcus could almost miss them. "Cripple brat! Monkey on parade!" Words sharpened with the knife edge of hate. The wind carried them like dying echoes, yet Marcus did not flinch. At that moment, the wail of sirens split the night. Blue and red lights danced across the blackened pavement, illuminating the bikers' frozen stares. Patrol cars roared onto the scene, tires screeching as officers spilled out, their flashlights cutting through the darkness in staccato bursts. Suddenly, the bikers' iron ring was broken by a tide of uniforms, and the leader realized too late that his arrogance had invited the full force of the law. Marcus felt a tremor of relief, but his father's voice, low, urgent, cut through the chaotic chorus of engines and sirens. "Stay here with him." Judge Hayes's broad form strode forward, robes flaring like battle standards. He planted himself between his son and the stunned bikers, voice carrying every shade of thunder. This ends now. The officers moved in with practiced precision, cuffs clicking onto wrists, boots clomping as they gathered the gang into their ranks. The leader spat another curse, but this time it landed on steel cuffs, his swagger reduced to a hollow shuffle. The puppy, startled, yipped once, then whimpered in Marcus's arms as he rocked it gently, whispering promises of safety. The judge's gaze swept over the bikers, his eyes blazing with a father's fury and a magistrate's resolve. You are charged with assault on a minor, hate crime, animal cruelty, and disorderly conduct, he proclaimed, each accusation a hammer blow against the cruelty they had unleashed. The bikers' bravado crumbled. One lowered his eyes, another spat into the dust. They knew the full weight of their crimes would bear down on them in court, that the judge's robe was no mere garment but a symbol of justice, with no mercy for bigotry. As the last suspect was escorted to the patrol car, Marcus wheeled forward, wheels spinning over the fallen leaves. He stopped beside his father, voice small but unwavering. Will it ever end? The puppy nuzzled his neck, and the judge placed a hand on his son's shoulder, strong and reassuring. Hatred never truly ends, he said, but love and justice are the shields that endure. You have shown more courage on this road than they ever could. This crossroads will stand witness that no act of cruelty goes unpunished, and no child's dignity can be crushed without a voice rising in defense. A hush fell as the wind rustled through the naked branches overhead, carrying away the last echoes of motorcycle engines. In the distance, a lone owl hooted, a sentinel's call to the survivors of the night. The puppy's whimper softened as Marcus stroked its fur, tears at the corners of his eyes, not of fear, but of relief and sorrow for what they had endured. Lights from the courthouse windows cast a golden glow down the highway, a beacon of law and order restored. Marcus rose from his seat slightly, leaning into his wheelchair's wheels as if to prove his strength one last time. Behind him, Judge Hayes held the puppy, eyes wet with both pride and grief. Marcus inhaled the crisp night air and spoke again, voice echoing on the blackened road. The road won't be the same after tonight. His father nodded. No, he agreed. It will be better, because you dared to stand when the world tried to break you. Together, they turned toward the glowing courthouse, wheels and footsteps carrying them forward. Around the corner, the patrol cars departed, lights fading into the distance as if signaling the end of one storm and the promise of another. And as father, son, and puppy passed under the courthouse portico, Marcus felt the burden of the past week lift, replaced by a fierce hope that even at the crossroads of cruelty, love and justice could blaze a path through the darkness. The crossroads lay behind them, scarred but cleansed by the storm of truth. Ahead stretched the path to tomorrow, where wheels and paws and robes would journey side by side, bearing witness that no act of hate, no stomp of boot, could ever snuff out the enduring light of human dignity. Let us know what you think of this story in the comments. Have you ever faced racism in your life? Your experiences and voices matter deeply to us, and we appreciate each and every one of you. If you're here until the very end, type "I stand with dignity" so we know you listened all the way through. Don't forget to subscribe and give this video a like. Have a good day.